Hello, and welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with John Spencer, considered to be the world's leading expert on urban warfare. John has published so much work on the subject of urban warfare through multiple publications, a book, and his podcast, The Urban Warfare Project. Talking to John, it's clear why he's considered the expert. His published mini manual for the urban defender has very specific details and tactics on how to operate in an urban warfare environment. In this episode, we talk through his experiences in an urban combat environment and how those influence his views. We discuss why the future of warfare is urban and how that's played out in the U.S. military policy overseas. We also briefly talk about his views on social connections in war, which inspired his upcoming book, Connected Soldiers, which is available for pre-order on his website. I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of not only this conversation, but reading through John's mini manual. The very last segment is entitled The Will to Fight, which we talk a little bit about during this conversation. It's not hard to understand why the will to fight is so important, and the applications stretch far beyond just combat. Please enjoy this conversation with John Spencer. John, you were just mentioning that this is maybe your 130th podcast episode. Is that right?
That or interview, so TV, podcast, print.
So what is the question? Maybe I'll start out with, what's the question that you haven't gotten in all of those interviews that you want to have been asked? Because I gotta believe that there's one of them.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So most of the questions really have been about Ukraine and less so about, what did you most take from your military experiences? A lot of it's about my expertise in urban warfare. But we all take something from our time in the service, no matter what service it is.
Yep, that's very true. One of the first notes that I had here was just highlighting the fact that you had 25 years in the Army. You're a published author, dozens of articles, book contributor, speaker, kind of like a go-to news source for, like you said, all the Ukraine thing, events taking place right now. What do you think that you would consider your biggest contribution, maybe to the military as an organization, to the world? What would you say?
So I had a dream career, and I have a dream job, and I get paid to study something that not many people study, which not in a good way. It made me very popular because of what Russia's illegal invasion into Ukraine. I mean, one of the things I provide that I think the world is an expertise, right? So there are a lot of experts in the world, and I consider myself a student, not an expert, of a very, very narrow aspect of war, and only the dead have known the end of war. So I think it'll continue to be important, and there's reasons why my field of urban warfare is important. I got a little bit of attention because unlike most people, we just don't like seeing evil things happen to good people. So when the Ukraine war started, I started putting out, because of the power of social media, tweets on, hey, as an old military guy, and same thing that you could do, like I can give some advice to people without training. So I started tweeting about, if I was in a city trying to help the military, or if I was the military, resist a powerful enemy, there's some very basic tasks that people don't think about that go back to actually antiquity, siege, castles, you name it. So I think right now, because of that question, I think we all change every day. We change every month, every year. That question today, I answer it with, I think I've provided a pretty valuable resource to help good fight evil.
You've published on your website that's available called the Mini Manual for the Urban Defender, a guide to the strategies and tactics for defending a city. What was the birthplace of your interest in the subject? Because you have published, like I said, dozens and dozens of articles and been featured in all these books. where does the interest in that particular subject come from?
So that's another good question. And I have many interests. I have, like I said, I have a dream job where I was paid to follow the passion and the interest. Where did it all start? I mean, I was a part of the 2003 invasion into Iraq. I had the honor to jump into Iraq as a parachute assault in the north during the invasion in 2003, and we quickly moved south into dense urban terrain in Erbil and Kirkuk. So I think it all started with some of my first combat deployments. And then in 2014, I had another dream opportunity to be pulled into a very special group researching for the chief of staff of the Army, so the top general of the U.S. Army, who put together a small research group. And in 2014, we were told for a year, hey, your job is to study megacities and what that means to militaries, whether it's littoral aspects or doing operations in them. So that's really where the kind of the academic study started. And then I moved to West Point, where I was teaching strategy and tactics, and was selected to help stand up a research center. And then I found a passion for writing, which I think it would be really interesting to talk about why I write so much, right? So I have over 100 plus articles. I have 2 books coming out this year. Clearly, I have an interest and a passion in writing as well. I now get paid and follow a passion in researching urban operations.
Yeah, I think that the power in writing is so fantastic, and not only a good outlet for people personally, but through uses like an online website, through Twitter or whatever it is, a chance to get your thoughts and opinions out there, and be able to quickly share how you feel and what you think is right. And I think over the long term, the good things, the cream tends to kind of rise, and there's a lot of, to put it one way, there's a lot of shit out there. There's a lot of stuff that isn't really helpful, but I think that your presence online as um, hard to view it any other way other than constructive. You talked
Yeah.
about that position, like being able to do that over the course of your career. You called that a dream. What does that mean? Like, how a dream to you, a dream to anybody?
I think it's a little combination of both, right? So I'm a firm believer that things happen for a reason. I spent 25 years in the Army, um, and had amazing experiences. And not everybody who serves in the service has the same experience, right? They each have their own experiences, jobs, first line supervisors, opportunities, and doors open, and sometimes it's on you to walk through that door. So the dream was the doors being open, and of course I walked through many of those doors, or I pursued many of those tracks. But there's very little negative from my experiences. There's some bad that come with the good, but the dream was that career and the opportunities I was given, and the tracks and the people I interacted with. Because I'm a big believer in Malcolm Gladwell's book, which talks about people that rise, and it's not just talent. It is opportunity, but it's also taking opportunity that get presented to people. And sometimes that's a major shift in your life. And there are a couple of moments in my career where that happened. So I think it's about the dream to me I joined the Army at the age of 17 from a small town in Indiana. So clearly a dream, and nothing well, really it's more than a dream. It's nothing I could have imagined that I would be sitting here and, be on national TV and have books, and most of my family's extremely proud of that. But it's about the dream to me, and a dream to, I think, to anybody. And that's why, military service, it does so much for the individual, for our society, to get that experience. And then whether somebody just goes back out into the community, and no matter what, I think the majority of people become a better person and a better part of society.
I'd agree with that. I think that it may take some people some time. And like I was sharing with you before we started recording, it definitely took me some time, I think, to really appreciate everything that the military gave me, because it's not, you have to dig a little bit. It's very easy to skim by on the surface, and there's just a lot of bad things. Being away from your
Yep.
family, not
Yep.
super conducive to the family lifestyle, some of those harder things. You seem extremely upbeat and positive and focused in on the great opportunities that the military has given you. Were there any moments that you questioned it, or where those opportunities weren't super readily apparent?
Yeah, absolutely. And I 100% agree with you. And with the great things, also comes great hardships and adversity. Sometimes it's the adversity that makes the thing great, right? You don't appreciate things unless it's harder. Things taste better. It's just a human nature, right? Absolutely, there have been low points. There were low points in my military career where I almost called it quits or pursued stopping. And usually when I had younger soldiers too, that was what I always told them, right? Because I had a longer view, even though there were plenty of times where I wish I could have got out, or I was of course headed towards retirement. So there's kind of this area where you're like over the hump towards the old retirement system, where you're like at like 12 years, 15 years, you're like, I can't take this anymore. I got to go. And then there's this carrot at the end of it. If you can just hang out. And I think everybody faces that, accounting for my soldiers and that family aspect. And the book that I wrote called Connected Soldiers is a huge part of that research into looking at the connection between the soldier and their family and their support networks, if it's just friends, family, loved ones. And I had experienced that in 2018 when my wife left and my three little kids, even though understanding why we have to go away and do deployments and things like that, it was really hard. But like I said, if you take the aggregate, whether it's a 2-year career or a 20-year career, there was always more positives and good days than bad days. And I always told myself too, when I was in, if it ever got to a point where there were more bad days than there were good, then I would exit. Luckily, the all the good. But that's why I used to tell like my soldiers too, who were making a tough decision early in their careers, like 4-6 years. They're basing their decision just. Oh, I understand 100% the decisions that you need to make, but make sure you don't make them. The military is for us. The Army is a million-man army is a huge place, and I had the gift of being having great assignments and a majority of great leaders. So, but I know that we rotate, and you can't make big decisions on a single place you live, a single first line supervisor, a single duty station. For us, it's just take a thought on if you have a major change, would it change somebody's perspective on good versus bad or time to go or not?
I'm always curious to ask, from my research on you, it appears that you had the opportunity to progress through the enlisted ranks before going to officer. And I think that people who have gone through something similar and seen both sides of the table kind of have a really unique perspective about the different challenges, and maybe are better to empathize with their soldiers in that position. How did your views of like the problems that soldiers face change when that transition happened?
Yeah, so depending on which of my soldiers you ask, sometimes it's not as a good thing, because then you know I was able to go into new positions where like as a platoon leader, as a junior officer, with a tacit amount of knowledge on what the soldier experiences, what the requirements are, what each job is supposed to be doing. And as you quickly rise to the officer rank, some of that it isn't as advantageous. But as a brand new officer, I've reached sergeant first class, so I'd actually held almost every rank of the people that I was in charge of. That's not a necessary in leadership, but it did give me this, at least a short-term edge. Now, like I said, my soldiers thought it was, where you're getting into their business or you're getting into the sergeant's business. And like, no, I know where the divides are. Hopefully it made me a better leader. Again, depending on which one you ask. I actually, I think it frees cognitive load when you have that amount, those type of experiences. So as a former ranger instructor, I know a lot of the stress of leadership is really cognitive load, right? You're learning as you're doing. I was able to free up cognitive load because a lot of the positions I was leading, I had either held, pretty much I'd held them. So for me, it freed up cognitive load, and hopefully it helped me in decision making, where And I think in other positions where I've held, where I was, so overloaded with trying to understand so much. And I think that's where I think the biggest advantage is. And again, as you rise, basically up to like major level, and then you're doing less of that, you know, firsthand decision making really at that point. And that's what my mentors told me. As a matter of fact, some of us that grow up through the ranks, then when they get to that level, then they struggle with other requirements of leadership on oral and written communication and things like that. That again, just dream opportunities. I had some amazing mentors and teachers.
I'm not familiar or hadn't heard that term cognitive load before, but I think that really is succinct in talking about the kinds of challenges that maybe new officers are facing. I hadn't really from the enlisted side hadn't really empathized that way before, where it's like this young, maybe they're 22 years old and they just get out of college, and now all of a sudden they're in charge of this division of 100 people or something, and I don't know, they just are able to drink legally. That's a very big set of shoes to fill for an officer in that position. But there definitely is kind of a different sense of respect, I think, that's gained from that prior enlisted marker. And I think you feel it on the enlisted side. You're like, man, I know
Yes.
that this guy knows what I'm going through.
Yeah, so in leadership studies, or even in Army leadership manuals, there's many forms of power, and one of them, not in power of like a bad way, but just in position. There's something called reverent power, which I think, yes, I think I was able to do that quickly, where other people had to earn that with actions. Some of my career and the things I had done and the places I had been allowed me to walk in with a little more reverent power, as in appreciation from the soldiers, as in I've walked some shoes, maybe not their situation exactly, or I've done some things that, us in the military, we have badges and schools and experiences that some people value a lot. And like our Ranger School, which is kind of it serves many purposes, and why I identify as a Ranger as one of my many identities. But yeah, I walked in the door with a little bit of reverent power. Yeah.
I want to dive into your study and kind of knowledge of the idea of the urban defender, your kind of almost lifelong study of it, and deep knowledge and expertise in the area. I spent some time in preparation for this interview, like going through your manual for strategies and tactics on defending a city, and some of these are like, it's unbelievably detailed. And when I first was going into it, I try not to have like expectations of anything or anybody prior, but I'm like, how high level is this? A lot of stuff you hear in the news and books are very just kind of woo woo strategies, and like, here's what ideally you should do. And I couldn't find anything this was the exact opposite of that. This was like, just for anybody that wants to follow along and read this, and we'll have the link in the show notes and whatever, but you start out with Spencer's standing orders for the urban defender. Defense is the strongest form of war. The attacker must come to you and be in prepared positions. He must cross the open street to attack you. Kill him in the streets and alleyways. Like, you literally go through very step-by-step tactfully about resource conservation. I was like blown away. I almost don't even know what to say about it, because it is just it's concrete, it's real. And I think it really shows your expertise. When reading through it, a lot of your ideas hinge around the idea of defense. And I don't want to speak for you, so if that's wrong, feel free to jump in here.
That's true. That's true.
Why is defense so important in urban warfare? And maybe actually, before we even get into that, can you define urban warfare for us, and maybe the role that that's playing in the world right now?
Sure. So don't ask the urban warfare expert to give you a definition of urban warfare. One, that you pull the word apart. So let's define urban. So urban, as we define it within the military, means it's in a built up areas and man-made structures, buildings, a population of people, because you don't have urban unless you have people there. So if you empty if you're playing around, like us military people do practice in urban warfare, and it's just a bunch of buildings, and it's not urban warfare. So you got to have buildings, you got to have people, and you got to have the infrastructure to support these, right? Cities share the Latin root with civilizations. Urban areas are the people; they are the communities that live there. Add the other word, warfare. Warfare means fighting, right? So war is actually a much larger term that includes like political objectives and things like that. When you talk about warfare, you talk about armed fighting. So urban warfare is armed fighting. Along this, there's a big spectrum of who's doing the fighting in urban areas. So populated urban areas. Why the focus on defense? So if you take this up and without getting like my professor hat on or my instructor hat on, all wars is somebody seeking a political objective. In this situation where so I spent years teaching, I go around the world talking to militaries about the way they approach urban warfare, to include a lot of time with our U.S. Army, from the highest level exercises down to the individual soldier. Sometimes people hold things in their mind because of some built-in things into our army. So we're really an offensively based army, right? So we imagine ourselves playing a away game, attacking the enemy. But history shows that based on what the objective is in the fight. So in for instance, I don't want to talk generalities. In the war in Ukraine, Russia did not recognize the Ukraine as a country. Putin, as a leader, had put out message saying he doesn't recognize Ukraine as a sovereign nation, which is a concept that the world created. And then he invaded with the invasion with the sole intent of taking out the government. So the strategy all the way down to the tactics that army, the Russian army, needs to do is very clear. There's one goal: get into the capital city, because cities are the economic engines and the political seats of power, right? So it's not rocket science on analyzing what Russia needed to do in this war. He needed to get to Kyiv. He needed to get inside Kyiv. Now, right, he has this overwhelming military power, but across history, the defense, like you read in those basic instructions, has always been the strongest form of war. That's historic, and data and everything. And it makes sense, right? If my political objective in the war is not to allow you to take my stuff, whether that's my people or my cities, I don't have to go out and attack the other army. I can defend and let them attack me, which they give up almost all their advantages when they're attacking a defender. And the other thing you talked about on the manual, which to be honest, I could not have dreamed the viralness that little manual, which now version 4 is out, how fast it went. It spread around the world. So it's been translated not just in Ukrainian, but it's been translated in Romanian, Latvian, Japanese, Mandarin, think Taiwan and Taipei. It's really become a manual for the weaker countries that view themselves as weak and in danger, on ways that they can either buy time, because all war is about time as well, or defeat somebody who's trying to attack and overwhelm and take what's theirs. So I'll let you kind of re-hit that, but that's kind of basically why the defense. And another thing about the manual, I think this goes back to your question about my listed time. I've taught strategy at the very highest level, and I'm talking about all the greats, like the military theories, and it sounds like at this level. But I'm also an old soldier who knows that if you need to communicate, it has to be in simple terms that's understandable, right? You know this from even learning basic military tasks. So if you look at my standing orders or a single page, it's in as clear as language. And also something that I took from writing is about short sentences, concise, because I know even the best soldier and who I'm communicating with that manual is not really soldiers. It's really, if you're not a soldier, but you want to help fight, a lot of it's about protecting themselves. Because I would quickly realize in the war in Ukraine, people just don't know, don't stand in the street or you're going to get shot. But the importance of the way I write is that it's short sentences, very clear. And some people, you may call it like elementary, But the point is that war is not as complex, and fighting absolutely is not as complex as you think. Once you understand the basics, and it's another, and then lastly is an aspect of it. I had the great opportunity to be a teacher in multiple points in my career. When you're forced to teach something, we know for a fact in learning sciences that you achieve a new level of mastery because your ability to communicate information and let somebody else learn, then you also achieve this weird new level of mastery. Like you don't even think about it and you know the information after you've taught it for so much. So that's again the beauty of my weird development and what I hope that the manual that people can just pick it up and understand something. They might not get all of it. Some of it is, like how to do an ambush. It takes time to learn how to do that, but you go out and put a barrier in the street is about as clear a message as you can get.
How would you square your ideas around defense being the primary, maybe the first resort as a strategy in like a country? How would you square that with the US's approach? And your views don't have to constitute anything or whatever. We're just talking to you here. Do you think that we have adopted that strategy, and has that contributed to any failure and or success in your view?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question. I would love to answer it because one of the reasons that I have job security is because that militaries don't allow themselves, as in militaries are institutions, right? I'm not talking about soldiers. For some reason, which boggles the mind, haven't allowed themselves to focus on urban operations because militaries don't want to fight in cities. It's the worst place you could ask the military to fight, and most of the power that is military power gets reduced if you send them into urban terrain. So there's something that it's interesting that you'd ask the question. We call it the Western way of war. There's actually a really good podcast that I was on. It's not my podcast. My podcast is the Urban Warfare Project. But looking at, is there a very specific way that the West and the United States, which really, if you listen to that podcast series, ends up being the answer to the question, what is the Western way of war? It's the US and that other people adopt. And that's kind of just the nature of what it is. And I'm not being arrogant. It's just a fact. Now, there are some people do it differently, and some people do think differently. But not to get too technical on you, the foundation of the American way of fighting is what's called a combined arms maneuver. And like I said, it's offensively based. We think we're going to be, because of our power, we can project power. And actually, some of our power is our logistical backbone, right? Like our Navy, the ports, and the ability to move equipment around the world anywhere, and our Air Force, the ability, that's unique into the world, that amount of power. But usually it's offensively based, even though we know in all war, whether it's a city block or a full out war, that you're going to be doing both offense and defense. It's just a fact. Yes, I think that the United States military and people that follow us underestimate the power of the defense. And some of that's based on what we believe when wars come will be our objective, what the U.S. military will be asked to do, right? We get our directions from the political leaders, do this, and then we'll develop the best military advice in the campaign to do it. But we strongly believe that will be offense. What Ukraine is showing is that there is still a giant need to be able to defend what you protect, what you want to value. As a matter of fact, I view a soldier's role is not only the ability to close with and destroy an enemy, but also to be a guardian, right? So to be the protector of the weak and all of that. That clearly has an aspect of the defense. So I think after this war, to be honest, there's going to be a lot of relooking at, are we prepared to defend? And, at Russian failures, they failed to be able to do offense, to be clear.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you touched on something there that's important, is like understanding what the objectives are of the country. Ukraine might not in and of themselves have the ability to kind of play the role that the US largely has for the last couple hundred years. And that's the kind of big brother waiting for somebody to step out of line and, jump in to defend. But I think that projection of power has certainly been the the motto of the US for some time, especially on the Navy front. That's something that we heard all the time. Hey, we're going to go through this area. Why? Well, we just need to let people know that we're there.
Yeah, and that we can go there. Yeah. I think so. Again, I'm a huge believer in basics. Don't overanalyze the Ukraine war. Number one simple thing is that the Ukrainians prevented the Russians from doing what they wanted to do. That's it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they've killed a lot of people, a lot of Russian soldiers, and they've paid a big price for that. And that's a method of defeating a superior military, is to basically kill more of their soldiers. But the number one simple thing they did was stop Russia from doing what it wanted to do, which was to get into and hold, or to get into Kyiv, but also in all the other areas. They actually never controlled a single city other than Kherson, one of the cities in the south, and it's arguably on that. So number one, Ukraine at the end of this will say they've already won a phase of the war, but the way they did that was to prevent the Russians from doing what he wants to do.
Well, and I think that even already, it seems to me, and as a non-expert, I'm not the foremost expert on Ukraine or anything that's going on in the world in regards to warfare by any means. But to me, I think that the first initial response sets such a large tone for how the rest of the time will go. And if it's not as easy as you think right at the beginning, then that might serve to show that, like, hey, maybe we're up against something much larger. Something that I wanted to call out from the last segment of that manual is called The Will to Fight, and a couple of lines from that. Do not let fear overcome you. Urban defenders must keep the will to fight inside of them. And I think that if the news has shown us anything about what's going on in Ukraine, it's that those people are ready to die for their country. And that's something not to be underestimated.
No, absolutely. And that one's near and dear to my heart. I think, again, people that don't know assume that what wins wars is a bigger military, a better military, like a more better weapons, and they'll go through all the analysis and talk about all the different types of weapons. I know what wins wars are soldiers, or seamen, or Marines, or that's what went. There's no doubt in history from antiquity until now, and we know that once a soldier, a motivated soldier with the will to fight and pay a bigger price, and there's history on why soldiers or fighters or civilians will fight. Some of it is for a nation, some of it's for a cause, some of it's just to protect their family. Some of it's what really it comes down to, honestly, and what my book Connected Soldiers talks about is history shows it's soldiers they all those are motivations, but the biggest thing they fight for is the person to their left or right, the people they're fighting with. When people forget that, then you see what would be called an upset, where an army that you thought should have lost in a day can achieve great feats like we've seen in Ukraine. I mean, don't belittle the fact that the Ukrainian military was highly trained, highly equipped, and then got a force multiplier when the reserves, which is civilians called into kind of military duty, and the civilians helped fight. But you can neck it all down to them having a higher will to fight and be willing to pay a higher price. And then you can look at it from the Russian side. They didn't have any of that. They didn't have the will to fight. They didn't know where they were going. It went really bad for them. And we know as leaders, and when it starts to go bad, which it always does, there's things that hold it all together, like leadership, like morale, like the will to fight, that all has to be nurtured. And like messages, like the president of Ukraine's messages were a huge part, and will go down in history as a huge part to keeping everyone with the will to fight.
I think that there's a lot of application of that concept to things far beyond just war. What would your advice be on how our current military and just day-to-day people, whatever it is that you're fighting for, how do we keep that will to fight alive?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. And as I've gotten interviewed, and everybody focuses on morale, and yes, but it's actually complex. So I like to look at it as you're driving a car, and each one of the indicators are important. Some, your engine your engine heat is really important, and some of these are more important than other things. It really takes an understanding of the individuals to be really to apply that, right? And we talk about that, right? That's why we have the best military in the world. It's not necessarily our equipment and all of that. It's that we value every soldier, and we have this leadership backbone, right? The non-commissioned officers and the officers, that we view every person as a soldier himself, or a seaman. And I mean, don't let me creep my service. Uh, when I say soldier, I mean
No, I'm
military
tracking.
service. Okay. Um, we know that everyone matters. Now, some people get that wrong or right, but it's under adversity, right? Because there's lots of things that we do in the service that has application. Some of it doesn't. Or if you're civilian, some of it's okay. It's back and forth. But under the most extreme adversity, we know that there's core things that really matter. One of them is just connection, right? So when you allow somebody to, and this is part of the urban manual too, is to stay busy. When you allow a single person to think that they're alone, whether it's during COVID or in the worst situation in war ever, we know as human beings we need social connections. We need to stay connected, and to know that we're not alone, even in our little network or in the world, or that somebody has experienced it before. That applies as much to soldiering as it does to living. And then the other aspect, I think, personally, my personal opinion, is that there are acts that can be done to show somebody you care about them that aren't, you know, some people joke it's about hugging people, but I've been in some very dark places. And when somebody stops and talks to you as a person, and says, or even asks if you're okay, that's a huge aspect to keeping somebody in the fight. And in the fight can mean literally fighting. It could mean literally just surviving, like if your city's under siege and you're in a basement, not knowing why if life is of value or anything. Or it could be in your everyday life here in America. Keeping somebody in the fight is part of human nature. And somebody in whatever situation, especially in the military, if they ever forget that all the way down to the individual level, that's when things start to go wrong.
Do you think that the focus on the individual soldier, their mental health, kind of just the ability to kind of like talk through issues that they're going through, do you think that that will be an increasing part of our military's readiness going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most people in the military understand that, especially when you have a professional military, right? So the United States military went from a conscript draft system in the 70s, which was needed, and it was needed after World War One, in World War Two. It's sometimes you need to do it. But we understand that the most powerful system is a volunteer system of professional soldiers. So absolutely, do I think it'll be important going forward in a system where you're asking somebody voluntarily to do much of what they're doing. You're not, because it's a weaker system if you demand things out of people, right? And that's why leadership is about leading and somebody following you, right? It's not leading from the rear and sticking a rifle in somebody's back and telling them to go forward. We've learned that across time too. The most powerful form of leadership is when you're in the front and they're following you, or they want to follow you, and you can take that symbology across many aspects, even in everyday American life. Like our elected leaders are our leaders that we want to follow, and it could be a first line supervisor. So absolutely, it becomes the core. And as the world changes, right? So the mental health of the soldier, that's a very complex topic, right? And every individual soldier is different, and they've experienced different things in lives up to that moment, and it's like near impossible to know all that. But this aspect of connection that's not virtual, to be honest, will become even more critical as the world continues to change, and social media and virtual connections. There's still basic human needs or basic human practices like eating together, sleeping together, talking to each other regularly, face to face. That's chemical. That will become even more important in the future.
I want to talk about how that plays into your book that's coming out this year. I have one other question on like urban warfare, I guess, and just kind of maybe your thoughts and views about the future. I think in large part, a lot of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq over the last 20 years, and we're seeing this now in Ukraine, has been a lot of this urban warfare, fighting in cities, fighting against this extreme disadvantage, really, surrounded by civilians in places that don't allow for just kind of total destruction. And the enemy has kind of used that against us. Do you think that that's what the future of warfare looks like?
Yeah.
Because, and I mean, take that any direction, the way that you want, but
Yeah.
I think that our enemies, whoever they may be, probably have seen how the urban warfare style has maybe not thwarted us completely, but been a splinter in our side in terms of effectiveness and completion of the mission.
Yeah, so I, like you said, I could take that in a bunch of directions as the urban guy, right? I'm a one-trick pony. That's what I do. And people sometimes will push that aside and then try to weaken my message that the world is urban. I don't see any wars in the future not being urban. Um, the just the geography and terrain still matters. You're going to have to either go through urban or the objective is urban, right? All wars, politics by other means, urban areas, seat of powers, economic importance. There's just no reasonable way people could say the future is not urban, right? 180,000 people move to a city a day. That's almost hard to believe, but that's a fact. The most developed countries are over 80% urban. There's you can go to like Africa and things like that where it's not, but the things that are of most value are urban, or the roads that are going to take you somewhere go through urban. So absolutely. And in all wars is, so I don't like the term asymmetric warfare because all war is about symmetries. If you know whoever's coming or whoever you're attacking is more powerful, then you seek other ways, right? You never attack an enemy at his strength. One of the problems with being a superpower in the world is that everybody's trying to beat us asymmetrically. They're not going to come at our power like at the things that we're really good at. They're going to come at us and try to take advantage of anything that we're not as good at, although we're really good at a lot of things. So where does that all come to play? In the urban areas, like you said, because a lot of our strengths are weakened, not negated, weakened in the urban terrain. And number one is our core values, right? So we don't kill civilians purposely. We follow the law of war and then some. So that's not a weakness, that's our strength, but it's also something that an evil enemy or a bad enemy will try to take advantage of. And again, regress into the urban terrain to take advantage of the fact that there are a lot of civilians around, which does mean the future of war is, and reasons that we strengthened the laws of war after World War II is because we didn't want the war in general to be impacted on, to be felt by as much as the populations of the world as World War II was. And clearly Russia doesn't care or whatever of that lesson. So absolutely the future is urban. And the problem is that hopefully there continues to be a raise in awareness of that, and then they're preparing for it because it does change the approaches, even us, the superpower, approaches war in the future.
Well, and that's so interesting. I think from a bystander perspective, it would be easy to say and to see a increasingly online dominated world, and maybe in like some kind of futuristic setting that all attacks we see are like cyber related and shutting down power grids over the internet and things like that. But like you highlighted, there's still such value in a physical location, and there's value in farmland, there's value in cities, there's still a geographical value that can only be found in that urban environment like you highlighted. I want to talk about your new book, Connected Soldiers, Life, Leadership, and Social Connections in Modern War, coming out July 1st. Is that right?
Yeah, available for pre-order now, though.
Oh, we'll need to get on that. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the book? What's the goal, big learnings and takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. So the book is mostly a memoir. right? So it's a memoir of my 2003 deployment as a young officer, platoon leader, invading into Iraq in 2003, and the life experiences of that. And then it's a memoir of my 2008 deployment, which was I was a new person. The war was a new type of war, and to be frank, the military was a different type of military. And then lastly, my experiences, personal experiences of staying at home while my wife went off the war, and I took care of my three kids. But of course, I'm a little bit of a geeky academic, so there's a theme and a reason for the book, which was to look at how the world has changed, how soldiering has changed with the invention of social media, right? And Ukraine is showing that, like, soldiers yearn to connect with their families and their social support networks outside of war. The days of sending soldiers off to war and then receiving letters from them weeks and months and later, or just waiting for them to get back, are gone, right? I can watch live feeds into Ukraine today. I talk regularly to soldiers and civilians inside of Ukraine, to include in places like Odessa and places like that. The war has changed. And that's what the book is about, is if it's changed, are we ensuring within the militaries and within our families that we're making sure we stay connected, not to use a pun, to what's most important. So the fact that my soldiers in war, not in 2003, so I kind of show as like a starting point. I think 2003 was what we remember, what we portrayed in the movies. It was very band of brother aspect, and sitting around campfires and bonding together. And by the time I went back in 2008, it was still that, but it was also, I come out of, I go back to my wherever I'm staying, and I can dial up, not dial up. That's really dating me. I can get online and then connect to my family, my friends. I can shoot emails. I can. And then when my wife left, she FaceTimed my children every night, and that changed them, and it changed her. So there's this aspect of change that I really tried to highlight. I don't give any answers, of course. I have more questions than I have answers. But the book is a really hard look at even what we know is the lifeblood of a fighting force, right? We just talked about the will to fight, what we call cohesion. If the lines between home and war are gone, clearly that has an impact on a unit's ability to form cohesion. As in, I will die for the person to my left and right. That's a fact that is needed in war. And has this new world that we live in changed that? I don't think it's changed it. I think it's different.
I want to hear you talk a little bit more about that, and I'm going to present a little bit of pushback, and I'll have to read the book and hear what you have to say. My dad was in the Navy, and hearing him tell stories of like writing letters to my mom, back in the 80s or whatever, it's obviously very romantic, and it's all these things, and this whole kind of like idealistic thing. And obviously that was much different than when I deployed. I could, once or twice a week, get on the computer while we're out to sea in the middle of the night and maybe send some messages to family. And I would push back on that and say that I needed that. So I guess how can we use the tools of technology effectively, people's families are probably, I would say that's probably 95% of the reason people get out of the military. Maybe 5% they hate it. Maybe the rest of it is that, oh, I have a family and I need to be home. How is more connection with the home front a bad thing?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I don't take what you're saying pushback at all. I think you're in 100% agreement. And once you read the book, you will be. So one, of course, it's better to be connected. And it is what my family needed. It's what my wife needed. But there's also a new sense of, right? So if I'm in war, of course I want to be connected, right? I yearn to be connected with what I value most, my family and my loved ones. And now we have that benefit. But there's also a lot of the stresses that come with that, right? So if I know someone's sick, or if I know something's going wrong, there is an aspect of, now I know that, when before in history it may have came to me a little later, or it may have come into me in a different way. So I don't talk in generalities. That's why I wanted this to be a memoir. I wanted to show, like, look, this is, in 2008, one of my soldiers receives a message that his pregnant girlfriend is in the hospital in after a drug overdose. And that's extremely crushing to the soldier. And it mattered on, on the team's ability to do what they're doing. And on the flip side, um, the families now get to experience war differently than they ever have in the past. When they can hear from their loved ones, or, oh, by the way, if they get used to hearing from them and all of a sudden they don't, it changes many aspects of the war. And clearly, yeah, I say this, there's absolutely huge benefits. And then there's huge drawbacks, and it's very complex. And I actually, at the end, say that there's something of this we just don't know, and it has to be studied more. An interesting aside on your writing of letters, right? What your dad did and what you ended up doing and what I did. There's been some really longitudinal research and analyzing letters from Civil War and before that, and what the content of the letters are, right? So the soldier yearns to explain what they see and what they're experiencing. And there's something different in electronic communication on the immediacy of the communication where has started to change and go away, as in what the content of the letter is, because there is a separation in time, like what the goal of the message is. When it's more frequent and more immediate, some of it's not good or better or badder, bad English, but it's a lot different.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I was actually just having this discussion with my fiance the other day, who's also in the Navy, and we were discussing how, while on deployment and being out to sea, it was almost hurtful to log in to when you get the chance to hop on the computer and you don't have a message. We're so tuned in
Oh
to
yeah.
that kind of like immediate response, and like we're the ones that are going like multiple days without being able to check. We look forward to that message, and when it wasn't there, it was like, wait a second, why aren't you responding? You have your phone. There should be no reason. It's been 4 days. And so that's an interesting highlight.
Yeah, I actually talk about that too, right? So in 2003, like mail call, like coming around and somebody calling your name that someone had written you or sent you a package, how much
Yeah,
that means to the soldier. And then the worst case scenario, when things weren't going right at home, I would call home and they were too busy to talk.
yeah. That's you're never going to call it a good time. That's for sure. Do you think that the increasing connectedness that we're talking about, and this may be something hopefully not burying the lead here on the book, but does the increasing connectedness come at the cost of the cohesion in the unit, do you think?
It can, if unchecked. If and there's no control of the information, right? So I don't argue and this has happened to include recently, taking that communication bridge away, like taking cell phones, taking computers. In some aspect in the word of operational security, and some aspect of just to be able to allow this cohesion. So it can, and that's what I saw. But there are things that we've done across time that we need to understand are vital for not just why we do. And I think I mentioned one of them. My family, has basically an electronic free dinner every night, and my wife tries to make it home every night. Now that has value historically in humans more than people know. Is when you eat, there's something weird about eating together, and like at the military academy, it's still enforced to this day that you're going to eat together. There's a bonding that happens in what we call breaking bread. And that has nothing to do with the amount of connection that we have. It's a moment of bonding. Actually, what we know and what I talk about in the book is that people think that what I call the Band of Brothers effect, right? Because that was a really good series. I do believe in it, and it does happen, and it still happens. Just happens. It doesn't just happen, actually. And it actually some of the most powerful bonding that is what leads to cohesion isn't just suffering the extremes of combat together. It's mindless hours of talking to another person. As you know, even on the ship, it goes both ways, right? If you get a butthole roommate or somebody, it can go the other way as well. But bonds of friendship which lead to brotherhood actually are formed in mindless hours of being together, and where connections can water that, interfere with that if it's not if it's not aware of what's happening, right? So that's what I became aware of, is that after a traumatic event, my soldiers came back. Normally, it'd just be normal to sit around and talk about that specific traumatic event. at that exact time. And they were rather coming back and then immediately connecting and telling someone else about it, which is natural, it's normal. But a leader has to be aware of, no, there has to be this controlled moment when we all talk about what we all experienced that together. So there's no control. The world has changed, but there are things that we've done across our time. And sometimes we don't realize what the benefits of what we were doing are. And the military is really good and bad about that, right? So we keep doing things that really are irrelevant just because we always have. And then sometimes we do away with things that, like, people sleeping in groups and things like that while they're deployed, that for us in the Army has so many benefits. Sometimes it's not known.
I think that it's very easy, especially for a younger person like myself, to look at the military as a dated organization and make the call for change and to update with technology. But I think deep down, there's a reason we do a lot of the things that we do, and it's showed itself in our effectiveness as a global power for the last couple hundred years. So I think that that's absolutely true. John, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. Where can people go to follow along with you? Where can they pre-order the book? Anything you want to dish out?
Yeah, so I have a website, johnspenceronline.com, where most of my writing, you can pre-order books there. You can also get most of my books on Amazon if you just look for them. I have a big Twitter kind of presence because I think it's important. So you can find me on Twitter at Spencer Guard, also Facebook. So mainly the main website, but there's a couple of directions.
Awesome. John, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thanks, Brock.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.